Welcome, everyone. Good evening. So, thank you for joining this wonderful session, which is based on the wisdom of Gita. Before we start, just a quick introduction of the NUS Bhakti Yoga Club. We are a sub club under NUS Hindu Society, and our key objective is to read, study, and assimilate the teachings of the great Vedas, especially the Gita, and share it with others so that we can share with others the wonderful wisdom by which we can lead happy and more wholesome lives. So today we have a topic which is I think very relevant to everyone because uh, everyone wants to be happy. In fact, all that we do in our daily lives, if we drill down deeper, it's because we want to be happy. And today we have a wonderful speaker with us, Mr. Siva Kumar, who's also known as Devakinandan Das. Just a brief intro of Mr. Siva Kumar. Mr. Siva Kumar has been traveling extensively and preaching the message of Bhagavad Gita in many parts of the world. He graduated from National University of Singapore with a degree in law in 1995 and has been practicing law for more than 2 decades. He is skilled at the art of negotiation, trust, and wills, intellectual property, drafting contractual agreements, bankruptcy proceedings, and family laws. But besides his legal profession, Sivakumar is also an adjunct lecturer at ESSEC French Business School, where he lectures on intellectual property, international business law, and business ethics. In the second quarter of 2018, he also received the Lecturer of the Year award globally across all the campuses. Besides all his wonderful achievements, the most important aspect is how wonderfully he has assimilated the teachings of Gita and travels around the world extensively to share the wisdom with everyone. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome Devakinandan Das or Siva Kumar to share this wisdom with us. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Vishal. Thank you for having me over. Um, I hope you can hear me, yeah? Vishal, am I okay?
Yes, we
Can you
can.
hear me?
Yes, yes, we
Okay.
can.
Will I be able to share the screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So, um, thank you to all of you for joining us today. Um, and thank you to the NUS Bhakti Yoga Club. And I'm very happy to have your acquaintance. And even though, the restrictions are such that we can only do this online, um, I think it's been a learning curve for all of us to try and maintain a sense of being personal, even while we are trying to speak to each other on online conferences. My wish would have been to meet all of you in person, because no matter how many times we try to do an online conference, and even if I get to see all of you, which is not the case at the moment, um, it would never be the same until we actually meet each other. And especially when you talk about a topic like this, happiness. The first indication of happiness is very often not what we say, but it is expressed on our face, actually. And it's very hard to hide expressions of happiness or unhappiness. And even if you hide it for a while, well, how long can you hide it? It has to show eventually. And I think we, as human beings, we are structured in such a way that we are somehow or other able to interact with each other. And after some time, we get the instinct of whether we can sense a person is genuinely happy, or a person is searching for happiness, or if a person is struggling with happiness and the lack of it. So this is the topic today. I was given this topic and I thought it's a very nice topic to talk about. So have you ever Googled happiness? The thing about Google, of course, is that you can Google anything. Um, but you can also Google for a definition of happiness. But whether or not you will be able to acquire happiness is a very different story, right? So while Google solves a lot of problems on planet Earth, fortunately, unfortunately, depending on how you see it, it doesn't actually help you with the happiness quotient. Mm. So what today we are going to do is our focus today will be how to actually derive happiness. What are the secrets about how to become happy? But this is very, in one sense, the forum for which we are speaking about today is on the basis of what the Bhagavad Gita and other similar scriptures that have come from the Vedic civilization have to say. I'm sure most of you are not alien to the Bhagavad Gita, and you know that the Bhagavad Gita is sacred to the Hindus. But time and place and circumstances will also tell you that for years and years, and it continues to be so, the Bhagavad Gita has often been also used as a secular tool to understand various aspects of life, management of time, concepts such as activity, concepts of how to approach work and activity, and of course, the concept of happiness. So, what does happiness mean, generally speaking? It's normally considered to be a sense of well being. We use the word joy very often, but we also equate happiness with a certain amount of contentment, isn't it? And you find that when you talk about happiness, you're also looking at two cousins of happiness, and that is satisfaction and peace. So sometimes when we're younger, I think we tend to use the word, I want to be happy, happy, happy. When you get a bit older, you find that, the aspects of satisfaction and peace are very important for you to define yourself as being happy also. So these are all part of what it means to be happy. The good news about happiness, actually, you notice, is that nobody complains about having too much happiness. I think generally speaking, most of us complain because we don't have too much happiness. Or even if we have it, it tends to be so transient by nature that for a while it's with us, and that's what makes it sweet, no doubt. But when it leaves us, it can be very difficult. So it's probably one of the few commodities or emotions in this world where we will never complain if we get more of it. Hmm? And no one, frankly speaking, has ever died of an excess of happiness, I think. So that's what happiness generally means. Okay. Now, the other thing that's very important about happiness, and this is a constant theme in the Gita, and it's also a constant theme in a lot of spiritual scriptures. The fact that happiness is there doesn't mean it stands on its own. Very often you find the saying, even in the secular world, that the pursuit of happiness is not so important as the pursuit of meaning. Because when you understand the meaning of what you do, that meaning and purpose, in this case, the purpose and meaning to your life, for example, often becomes the platform or what we call the foundation for your happiness. So these are very important concepts to bear in mind as background as we approach the concept of happiness from the Gita. The Gita starts with a very important question. And that question that runs through the Gita is the question that all of us have, actually. What is my aim in life? What's my goal in life? And whether I teach students or whether I spend time with my friends or family or any one of you, I think all of us will agree that generally speaking, and this cuts across all castes, creed, races, and places, we all actually generally have one theme, one aim in life. And the Gita says that it doesn't matter whether we subscribe to a belief or not, but generally speaking, everything that we do, when we drill down to why we are doing it, as Vishal started today's topic, it's because eventually we want to find some kind of happiness, satisfaction, or peace in what we are trying to do. In the Vedic scriptures, there is a saying, it's an interesting saying. It says that only two kinds of people in this world do not want to be happy. One is, of course, what we call the madman, meaning someone's not very well mentally, because they don't understand and cannot appreciate happiness. And the other person is a dead man, because a dead man, is just dead. And for him or her, it will be very difficult to experience happiness. So apart from the two ends of the spectrum, any sane personality in this world will generally want to be happy, satisfied, and peaceful. If you ask anyone here in this forum also, what is it that you want in life? You may go through many things. I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor, I want to get married, I want to do this, I want to do that. But if you go deeper and ask them, why do you want to do these things? What drives you? They may say, for example, ambition drives me, But if you push beyond ambition and you ask them what is it that really drives you, they'll eventually come to either one or any of these three or even all of this. So that is a very interesting fact, actually, that we're all united actually in a common goal in mind. But how to achieve it? That's the real question. Because we live in a world today which is very challenging, very challenging. And you see all the words that are on the slide. I think these are words that we hear more often than words, which are synonyms to happiness. Actually, frankly speaking, there are very few synonyms to happiness. Go search it yourself, and you'll find there are more synonyms and there are more words closely related to unhappiness than there are to happiness, actually. Life is really a pressure cooker. And whether you are studying, whether you are working, there will always be the concomitant anxiety, the difficulties, the challenges, the tension that always comes. For example, we're all gathered here on a Friday evening, and most of us feel that we are unwinding from work. And we hope that Saturday and Sunday, will give us a much needed respite. But the fact of the matter is, by Sunday evening, no matter how we feel, we'll all start feeling a little bit anxious and we'll start thinking about what happens on Monday. And have you noticed how whenever you finish that big exam of yours in NUS and you thought, this is it, I'm at the top of the mountain, the truth of the fact is, even if you reach the top of the mountain, the fact remains that you have to come down. Nobody stays at the top of the mountain forever. And that's why it's very important for us to recognize that we are facing, and we will always face these challenges. Nothing surprising, actually. The Bhagavad Gita advises us on the point that I just spoke about. The Bhagavad Gita talks to us about understanding if you want to take this quest for happiness, it's very important to understand that there is a nature to this world. All of us here, right, on the call today, you will notice that we all have our own natures. If any one of you are couples or if you are with family, you have your brothers and sisters, you'll notice that we all have a default setting. We have some kind of default nature. Some of us are naturally very calm. Some of us are very competitive. Some of us are just critical by nature. And no matter what you do with them, whether you stand on your head upside down for 100 years, they may change to a certain extent, but the default lines will always be there. So just like we are all made and come from different stocks, the Gita, Krishna in the Gita actually says that it's very important for us when we go on this quest for happiness to understand that there is a nature to the world that we are in. And that nature actually is stated in the 8th chapter of the Gita. It's in the 15th verse and it's right in front of you. There are two words to it. Dukhalayam ashashvatam. Dukhalayam ashashvatam. What it means is, this world is by nature temporary. It is temporary, ashashvatam. And because it is temporary, the very nature, the challenge of temporary matter is that it induces eventually some kind of misery or anxiety. So this world is actually given a very bleak outlook in the Gita. And whenever I speak to students about the Gita, I tell them to hang on. This is the part where things get a bit depressing. But sometimes, in order to get to the top, you have to go to the bottom. And that's why the Bhagavad Gita tells you to understand the world and look at the nature, look around you. And they say two things generally plague this world. And that's why the question often pops up. We talk about happiness, but as I said in the beginning, the caveat of happiness that we speak about is that yes, we get happiness, but our happiness is very often very fleeting. I mean, as children, I remember my happiness was defined by the number of toys I bought. And if I bought a toy on that day, I was very happy. But if a new toy came, right, no matter how good my initial toy was, my happiness had become significantly reduced. And I knew that it would be fleeting until I acquired the next toy. And that's how generally we live in this world. So the Gita tells us that wherever we are, whoever we are, whether we subscribe to faith or not, whether we subscribe to a being or not, we will encounter three different kinds of miseries. The first is what we call miseries caused by others. Have you noticed how you could be walking down the road and minding your own business and someone on a PMD, God forbid, would just ride past you and knock into you? It happens. Have you been on the right side of the road and keeping all the way to rules and regulations and someone just cuts by you and you have to brake your car and before you know it, you've hit him at the back? And according to rules and regulations in most jurisdictions, when you hit someone at the back, by default, you are contributorily more negligent than the other person. But you would say, he just came in front of me. And this is how miseries are caused by others. I practice family law, which includes a fair amount of divorces. So I see this problem coming up in couples very often, even though we do so much mediation. They say, well, I was going on with my life so fine until you came into it. And you say, and you keep thinking that I'm the good person, but miseries just keep coming to you. The second misery is very interesting also, but this one we all know. It's miseries caused by forces of nature. And you can see it around you today, isn't it? You see tsunamis, you see global warming, and nature is pushing back. And nature is so powerful that if you have ever been in the middle of an earthquake, for example, you would realize, as I did a long time ago, that you are completely helpless, completely helpless. And then this is the one I like most. It's miseries caused by ourselves to ourselves. And it's very often has to do with the mind. Have you also noticed sometimes in your life, someone whom you think is a good friend, and all the time you smile at each other, and one day he starts not smiling at you. And there could be a perfectly sane reason to it, but he doesn't tell you about it. And for a whole day, your mind can mess with you, and it can keep giving you all kinds of arguments why this has happened, what caused the problem. And sometimes we build problems in our heads to the point where we are out of touch with reality. And these are miseries caused by ourselves. So the Gita says that there are three kinds of anxieties and miseries, and they're very interesting, very interesting. The next area that the Gita talks about is also the fact that all of us in this world, we all have what we call four kinds of defects. And the problem with defects is that, when I have a defect, um, my tendency is to look for that same defect in others. But I don't make my defect into a big problem. But I make sure I find some fault in others. But the Gita tells us that we are all filled with defects. It's natural because we're human. The first defect that we all have is that we're sure to commit mistakes. I think there's no one in this world or in this forum, at least of 35 participants, who can safely say that none of us have ever made a mistake in our lives. It's part of being who we are. The Gita says that very often we are also illusioned. Illusion simply means that we see something and we perceive it, but it may not be the reality of the situation. And very often that has happened. It destroys relationships. It causes tension amongst each other. You go into the professional world and you cast aspersions on each other. This is the meaning of illusionment in the Gita. The Gita also says we have a natural propensity or tendency to cheat. Cheating not in the sense of crime in terms of cheating, but the ability to exploit. That sometimes when we have a position of advantage and we think this is the time I can take advantage of someone, we do it. And that's not a very nice thing. But you notice if you're in the corporate world, for example, that's the cut and thrust of the corporate world. If you're in politics, you'll find that's the cut and thrust of politics. And another thing that's really important, the Gita says we are limited by our senses, which are not perfect. Switch off all the lights in front of me and you can't see me. I can't even see myself. And yet, I may claim that I can see everything and my senses are perfect. Sometimes we say, oh, I know exactly what you're thinking. But we're not mind readers. And yet we say, I know by the way you told me something, that this is what it means. So when we understand these four defects and we understand the threefold miseries, we start looking at the world a little differently. And of course, the Gita says that we have also what we call four defects of life. And these are known as the stations of life. All of us who are here have been born, and those who are born must eventually die. Most of us, I hope, all of us will reach old age. But when we reach old age, the difficulties of it, your parents and your elders would know. And all of us at some point, will have to meet with death, but we'll all have to meet with disease also. So between the stations of birth, disease, old age, and death, there is a fifth station I've not written here, but it's known as deterioration. And that's the challenge of happiness in this world. The challenge of happiness in this world is that it's there, it's fleeting, and it has a tendency to deteriorate. Everything has a tendency to go on a high, and then it has to come down after a while. So Krishna's advice, Krishna is the speaker of the Gita, and Arjuna is the student of the Gita. So Krishna advises Arjuna on how to obtain happiness and how to obtain peace. This is a verse from the Gita that I wanted to share with you. Nasti buddhira yuktasya na cha yuktasya bhavana na cha bhavayata shantir ashantasya kutas sukham. And Krishna tells Arjuna, one who is not connected with the Supreme can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind. And without these two, there is no possibility of peace. And how can there be any happiness without peace? So you find that over here in this Gita, in this particular verse, three things stand out. One is the word connection. So obviously, Krishna is telling Arjuna that there must be a connection to something higher. Some people may call it the Supreme, some people refer to it as God. And in the Gita, he's referred to as Krishna. But what Krishna is saying is that until you connect yourself to a higher purpose and higher goal, having that intelligence that transcends this material world and having a steady mind is difficult because there is no anchor. And if the mind is not steady, then the possibility of peace is very difficult to find. And how can you have happiness without peace? So this is the verse that we have to bear in mind today on our journey. So the Gita gleans, and I have shared with you now, 6 principles on the journey to happiness. Let's look at them and see what they say. The first principle is accept more and expect less. The second principle is the universe is your university. The third principle is the secret to satisfaction, the joy of service. Fourth principle is simplify and don't complicate your existence. Needs versus wants. The fifth principle is unity in diversity. And the sixth principle, which is actually based on all these 5, is to pursue the meaning of life and not just the concept or the notion of happiness. Okay? Let's try to unpack them and see what they mean. Expect more and accept more and expect less. The Gita, as I told you, has actually stated that there is a nature to this world. And Krishna then tells Arjuna that a wise man is one who accepts the nature of the world. And another term for it that's used in the Gita is the word renunciation. Sometimes the word renunciation gives us this idea of a man who is emancipated, sitting down like a yogi in meditation, looking very starved, somewhere in the middle of a deep, dense forest, and he has renounced the world. But the Gita is a very interesting conversation. Arjuna was the fighter, and he needed to perform in this battle between good and evil. And at the last minute, he decided not to fight. But Krishna told him that your duty today is to engage in this particular warfare. You have no choice, because if you don't, then what would happen to the world is that the world would fall into very wrong hands. Therefore, Krishna advocated that you have to accept that the nature of the situation you are in, right, is such that it demands you accepting it. By running away from it, that doesn't mean you're renounced. In fact, when you accept that the nature of the world is in such a manner, when you accept that I have a nature, and you accept that your wife, your children, your colleagues have a certain nature, then half the battle actually is over. Because when you expect that their nature should conform to the way you expect them to be, your expectation will lead you down the path of unhappiness. But when you accept someone for who they are, then you have renounced your desire to impose on them. And that renunciation is very important. So Krishna says that this world is temporary, and therefore nothing lasts. Yet we think we do. There's a very interesting saying in the Mahabharata, which is where the Bhagavad Gita is found. What is the most wonderful thing in the world? And the most wonderful thing in the world, the answer is that every single day someone is dying. Yet those who live actually believe that they will live forever. So temporary nature of the world is something that we must accept. Some of you may know that the Buddha was a very wise and amazing personality who founded Buddhism. And one day the Buddha was seated under a tree and he was meditating with his disciples. And a lady called Gautami in the village came to see him. She was very distraught. And she was so distraught, that she held in her hand her dead child. He had just passed away. She dropped the child before the Buddha and told Buddha, please help me. You are so powerful. Revive this child. Bring me back my happiness. Because my happiness was with this child. The Buddha said, I can do it. But do one thing. You go and beg alms from anyone in this village, right? The only condition being the alms that you beg from that house, they must answer 2 questions. The first is they must never have known a death in their house. And second, they must always have known happiness in their house. And so Gautami thought, yes, this is achievable. I'm sure amongst all these people, one of them would qualify. And so an entire day passed, and in the evening, as the Buddha was planning to retire, Gautami came back. But she didn't look crestfallen. She didn't look sad. She didn't look devastated. She looked illuminated. And when she stood before the Buddha, she bowed before him. And she said with gravity that today, my master, I have understood what you meant. It was just not only me who had to suffer or experience death, old age, birth, and disease. There wasn't a single house that I went to that had not experienced it. And I have become calmer. I've become more peaceful in accepting that this is the nature of the life that I live in. So this is a very important part of our journey towards happiness. Because happiness is not the happiness we perceive in this world. Jumping up and down and having a good party, and then Sunday morning waking up with a hangover. That's not happiness. The happiness that Gautami was running after was a bit different. So when we cannot accept that this world is temporary, then what happens is we are always anxious, subconsciously or consciously, of losing what we possess. Have you noticed, even if I did not tell you that the world is temporary according to the Gita, if you look at your life and inspect it, we're always anxious once we have gotten something precious. The aim was to become happy when we have it. But when we have it, while there's some happiness, there's plenty of anxiety. I have high net worth individual clients who have so much money, believe me, that they wouldn't be able to spend it until the day they die. They could keep it for lives. But they have all the problems that you and I think are only confined to us, because they are very anxious about protecting what they think belongs to them. This is the basis of unhappiness in this world. Supposing you take up something and you think you own it. The moment someone comes and that person looks like he may take it from you, you are immediately in anxiety. And that's why we remember the great instructions of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, was the world's greatest and known conqueror at that time. But you all know he succumbed to disease that eventually led to his death in his early 30s. And when he realized that none of the doctors could save him, he made 3 conditions to his courtiers at the point of his funeral. The first condition he said was that I want all the doctors who tried working to save me, they should become my pallbearers. The second condition is that I want my hands to be outside the coffin in which you carry me, and they should be open with their palms facing outside for everyone to see. And the third and final one should be that whatever coins, and wealth I've amassed, I want all of it to be strewn on the floor. So the courtiers asked him, why such unusual requests, Alexander? He said, I want to show the world that the pallbearers who carried me are the ones who tried with futility to save me. And I want them to understand what I've heard, what I've understood today, that life is temporary. And when you accept it, then there is happiness and peace in accepting it, because you make the best use of it. The second point I realized is that I held so much wealth in these palms, but the day I leave this body, my palms will be open with nothing in them. Therefore, it's very important to value life not on the things we possess, but on something more deeper. And the third thing he said that's very important is that I want all these coins strewn on the streets, to show them that actually at the end of my life, they hold no value to me, even though I've wasted half my life acquiring them. What is the point of it? And then at the end of it, he said, but do you know what will happen? While the first two things will pass unseen in one sense, or maybe even accepted, while the coins will be put down and you will explain to them the futility of wealth, you can be sure that the masses will pick up the coins greedily as my coffin is going by. And that is why happiness cannot be Googled, you see. It has to be nurtured, it has to be cultivated, it has to be thought about. Losing what we think belongs to us is the greatest source of unhappiness. And therefore, conversely, understanding that nothing belongs to us is the cause of great satisfaction. This is a very nice verse from another important scripture known as Srimad Bhagavatam. Whatever is produced by the materialist with great pain and labor for so-called happiness, the Supreme Personality as the time factor destroys. And for this reason, the conditioned soul laments. It's like I get a check at the end of the month, and I draw out that amount as director's fee for my law firm. And at that point of time, the whole 30 days of working hard, I feel so happy for that moment when I get the check. And then when I come home and I see all the bills, and if it's Diwali that's coming and we have to buy extra things, so I have to do something else, you know how it is in Singapore. Your monies and your checks get wiped out pretty fast. And that is how, for a fleeting moment, we feel very happy because we really think that the check belonged to us. But eventually, despite our pain and labor, it has to leave us. Most of the time, we become unhappy because we cannot grapple with this and we are unable to accept it. There's also a very nice story in our scriptures, the equivalent of parables in the Bible, the lesson learned from the hawk. Once there was a group of large hawks, and they were looking around for prey. And they couldn't find any prey on that day, but they saw a small, weaker hawk. And that hawk happened to catch some meat on the ground. And it was flying up in the air to the branch of a tree to eat it. The moment the hawks saw that this small, weaker hawk had it, they attacked the weaker hawk in the hope that they would get the meat. The hawk struggled so hard because in its mind it was thinking, this is mine. I worked so hard, it belongs to me. But when it realized that it was being so harassed by these forces around it, it ultimately gave up the meat. And even though it was a bit hungry, the harassment, that was coming from the hawks actually went away. And by dropping that, which eventually would either be digested or would not belong to the hawk in any event, the scriptures tell us the hawk actually experienced a moment and an extended moment of actual happiness. So this is very interesting because everyone considers certain things within this world to be most dear to them. And because of that sense of attachment to such things, we eventually either become sad, anxious, or miserable because either we will leave those things or those things will leave us. So the Gita tells us that when we understand that eventually we will give up material possessiveness, and that it's better to cultivate a renounced attitude instead of an attached attitude, that gives us the way to reach happiness, satisfaction, and peace. So initially, the little hawk looked as if it appeared to lose the battle, but it won the war. It won the war because it became more peaceful. And when the other hawks all went away, this hawk was peaceful to go find itself some other food. So this is a very interesting point for us to ponder about happiness. That is why in the Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna that a higher taste is needed for us to experience happiness in this life. It's like someone gives you sweets, and they're not very sweet, but you eat it all the time and, well, you eat it. Then you get a first-class cook who comes with something really world-class. And once you eat it and experience the higher taste of it, you realize that true happiness was actually in that higher taste. And that all we have been experiencing right now was very temporary. So the Gita urges us to start cultivating that kind of thinking. It doesn't happen overnight, happiness, but it is a journey. And that's why the Gita's solution to this is to cultivate what we call the platform consciousness. I use the term platform consciousness because, when you go on the MRT stations, I'm thinking more of India where you have proper platforms, or Europe, when you have proper platforms and you have trains coming and the schedules don't meet sometimes, but you have to connect to another train to another part of the country, what do? Sometimes it could be 2, 3 hours. You go to the waiting room or you hang around in the platform, and suddenly you strike up a conversation with someone, a stranger, but they're nice to you, you're nice to them, and you sit down and you talk and you find things out about each other. But you both know at the end of the day that you're both on platform consciousness. Meaning to say that when that train comes, you will pack your bag and he will pack his bag. You both say goodbye to each other, and you will not be hurt, affected, anxious, depressed because you've left each other. You will know that you were there, always bearing in mind that you were the platform, you were on a platform. Another example given in the scriptures is that of a domestic worker, for example, or in those days they used to call them servants. A very chaste or loyal servant to the master in the colonial days would take care of the house until the master would come during winter or summer, as the case may be. And during that time, right, that person, the caretaker, would take good care of that place. And he would do it with so much dedication and loyalty, but always knowing at the back of his mind that the house doesn't belong to him. And that acceptance always gives that person a sense of detachment. And that leads one to a sense of happiness. But when we think something belongs to us, and by nature the world is such it has to leave, then it becomes very painful. So that's the first thing, to accept the nature of people. Then we have what we call, to accept the nature of the world. Then we have what we call to accept the nature of people around us. This is a very interesting topic, and it's actually addressed in this scripture, the Srimad Bhagavatam also. Different people are of different mentalities. Therefore, it is not my business either to praise them or blaspheme them. I only desire their welfare, hoping that they will agree to become one with the super soul, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. So what the Gita and the scriptures tell us is also to accept that people are of different natures and that they have different mentalities. And our business is not to impose or praise or blaspheme them. Praising them is not going to help, because after a while you become an expert in praising because you want to get something from them. Blaspheming them is also not very good because you become too critical. Rather, we desire their welfare and we try to serve them. So accepting nature of people is very important. When you accept the nature, you can then work around their natures. If you don't know how to accept it, then your expectations that their nature will be aligned to yours isn't always going to work. This is where the Gita brings up the concept of dharma. You've all heard this word dharma. Dharma has a variety of meanings as given here. It can be duty, it can be activity, purpose, work, nature, quality. But the important thing is, the Gita says that there's a deeper meaning to dharma. The best example is water. When you talk about water, you can't take away its liquidity. You talk about fire, you can't take away its heat. Fire without heat is not fire. So the nature of fire is to burn. The nature of water is to flow. Therefore, heat and light will always be with fire. And without heat and light, actually, there's no meaning to the word fire. Dharma in the Bhagavad Gita refers to that which is constantly existing with that object, a quality, a nature. And that is why, as we said, dharma means that which sustains your existence, that which is fundamentally who you are. So the nature of heat and burning actually gives meaning and function to fire. And wherever fire goes, heat, light, and the capacity to burn also goes with it. So Krishna in the Gita advances this nice point that while we may all have superficial natures, but we have a foundational nature in each of us, and it cannot be separated from who we are. If I were to see Vishal, I'll always define Vishal in a certain way, because I understand that that is his nature and that's his dharma. So the sooner we embrace that everyone has their own special and unique dharma, the more peaceful it is to exist and coexist. The second point about happiness that's given by the Gita is this attitude. This attitude is an attitude that we should cultivate in life. And this attitude is that the universe is actually your university. It's a nice point to remember. This universe is your university. So while in Singapore we may have NUS, SUTD, and others, we also have the University of Life. And the Gita tells us to see life as a journey with many destinations. And sometimes the problem with journey is that you're so much in a hurry-burry to reach the destination that you forget to smell the flowers and take stock of the beauty of your journey itself. So the Gita, when Arjuna became morose and depressed because he didn't want to fight the war, Krishna actually injected positive nature into him. He told him to get up and arise. And this positive idea, this outlook of a devotee, outlook of an aspirant for happiness, positive outlook is very important. Because you will find out by now, even without the Gita and in your life experience, that when you create positive energy, you attract positive energy. But when you create negative energy, all you get is negative energy. There's this nice story of the king and the minister, this minister was very close to the king, and he was a very God-fearing man, and he was a very pious man. And anytime there was a problem in the kingdom or challenges to the king, he would always say that God is so kind that even though he creates a situation that looks difficult, there's always a silver lining to it. It's always meant for your own improvement. The king was very happy with it until one day the king went for a hunting trip and he had to experience an attack by a lion. In the battle, the king kills the lion, but he loses his thumb. And the lion, goes away, but the king has lost the thumb. All the ministers, including this minister, come. And while they are all very worried about him, this minister encourages him, tells him, King, I know you have lost the thumb and it's painful, but you have your life. And the king became very angry. He said, what good is that to me? And the minister said, even if you have lost your thumb, there will be some good to it. Take it that way. And the king got so angry that he sent the minister back and imprisoned him. The king continued his journey into the forest because they were deep in the forest, and he was caught, surprisingly, by a band of bandits. And they wanted to actually sacrifice them as per their practice, as a human sacrifice. So the king was tied up and he was thinking, what a tragedy today is. I lose my thumb and now I'm going to lose my life. And just before he was going to be sacrificed, the chief priest comes up and says, we can't sacrifice the king. And the chief of the bandits say, why not? And he says, the reason is that this king, a sacrificial entity, has to be complete. And he's missing a thumb. And if he's missing a thumb, then good luck. You're not going to be able to do the sacrifice. It's very inauspicious. So the chief bandit didn't want to take a chance. And he said, fine, you're free to go. The king went straight back to the kingdom and unlocked the jail and freed the minister. And he embraced him. He said, today I've realized the value of being positive. I may have lost a thumb, but it saved my life. But what good did it do to you? You were put in jail. You had to suffer so much. Where was the good in all of that? And the minister smiled and said, my dear king, you and I are inseparable. And if I were with you, you would have gone in the forest. I would have gone deep with you. And if you were caught by the bandits, so would I. The only difference is when they wanted to sacrifice you, they would have seen you were incomplete. Unfortunately, I would have been complete. And they would then have sacrificed me. So this is a very important point for us to think and keep in mind. The next thing that's important is then to take this attitude of looking at what we can take from even the most hopeless of situations and avoiding the blame game, which very often descends into anxiety, pain, hurt, which is what the Gita doesn't advocate. The next point is very important, bring us to the third factor, and that's the innate spirit of serving that we all have. The Gita makes an interesting observation. It says in this world, right, friends serve friends, mother serves sons, wife serves husbands, daughter serves parents, husband serves the wife. Politicians convince the public that they will render valuable service to society. Not sure if that's true, but sometimes it happens. Shopkeeper serves the customer. Artisan serves the capitalist. Capitalist serves the family. Family serves the state. So if you've learned your history and political science, you'll understand where this is coming from. The whole world is running in terms of service. Service is a constant companion of the living being. And that's why the third factor to happiness is important. The secret to satisfaction is actually the joy of service. The secret to happiness and peace is the joy of service. Because actually, we all have in us a propensity to serve. No matter how selfish we may be, if given the right chance, if we love someone, if we care for someone, we're prepared to do something for them. That itself is service. The real question the Gita asks is, who do we serve? Do we serve our mind and senses? Or do our minds and senses serve us? If we serve our mind and senses, we become slaves to them. But if our mind and senses serve us, then we become masters of our minds and senses. Then there is a possibility of happiness. Very often the mind conquers us. You see this picture of Alexander and the great philosopher Diogenes. Alexander traveled to India, and Diogenes also was actually in Rome at that time, very famous philosopher. He founded a school of cynics. He was a cynic himself. So in this famous encounter, everybody was bowing before Alexander. And then he came across this philosopher who was grouchy and grumpy, didn't stand up. And all the soldiers behind were so shocked. You can see someone behind, they have a shocked expression. How is it that he's not standing up? He seemed so relaxed. He couldn't care less for who Alexander was. And Alexander said, do you know who I am? I'm Alexander the Great, And Diogenes replied very famously. He said, I don't know who you are. I don't care who you are. But all I know is that you are blocking the sun. So get away so that I can get the sun. It's very famous. But the point to Alexander was that no matter how powerful we may be, we are actually not very powerful. We are only powerful when we are able to control our mind and senses. In India, we have a recorded point where Alexander, when he was in India, met a very famous wise sage. He was seated under a tree, very non-committal and peaceful, detached. Alexander said, I've just conquered your land, bow before me. And the sage refused to. And Alexander got very angry. And finally, the sage looked at him and smiled and said, Alexander, you have conquered the known world. And Alexander smiled and said, finally, he gets it. Yes, I have. And the sage said, then why is it that you have not conquered your mind and your anger? And Alexander walked away much more wiser for that. Higher satisfaction comes from serving others, but you can do so when your mind and senses are in control. And when we try to live not just for ourselves, but we try to live to make others happy, this leads to what we call internal self-satisfaction. And I think it's something that we all know. Whenever you have stretched yourself, sacrificed something for someone, and you see the happiness that they get, isn't that happiness worth much more than what you would get? So happiness and conscience is very important. When we are in touch with our conscience, when our conscience tells us that it's not the result of what I will get when I serve you that's important, but the fact that I have an opportunity to serve you and make you happy, then we become the best we can be. Our motivation is actually premised on service, not service to our mind and senses, not even to our wants and desires, but to make others and place them in a better situation. So the Gita then tells us that in order to do all of what we have discussed, we need to come to this point in our journey of happiness, to simplify our existence and not complicate it. You see this picture? The horses represent all the different senses, and the lady who's trying to hold on very tightly to their reins is actually the mind. And behind the mind is intelligence, which is lost when the mind is in control, and the chariot is the body. So the Gita tells us that it's important to plan for the future, but there's a difference between planning and speculating. Very often when we speculate about the future, we become very anxious. I don't know about how it is, but my mother used to sit down and think, whether I'll go to the university, whether I won't, whether I will or whether I won't. And I told her, look, nothing has happened yet, okay? And your thinking is not going to help you. But we still do that. That's a small thing. But very often we speculate so much about each other. We speculate and form opinions, and that complicates our existence. There's an interesting story in the parables. There was a very wise man known as Gopal, and he had a neighbor And one day he heard his neighbor and his wife fighting like cats and dogs. So he went up to them and said, "Why are you all fighting?" They were so poor, they had nothing. Gopal said, "You both have nothing to fight about even. So what are you fighting about?" And the old man said, "Gopal, you don't know. Today I came across some money which was, in my savings and I didn't know. So we were talking about what shall we do. And I said, let's buy cows and we can take care of the cows and keep the milk. And my dear wife said, you can buy cows, but you need to buy a cow for my mother and my father too. And I said, no, I'm buying cows for us. I don't care about your mother and father. And when I buy those cows, right, those cows will be there and we will take care of them. And my wife is saying, no, some of them must go. And that's what we're fighting about. Gopal went outside, took a stick, came back and started hitting the man. And his wife said, why are you hitting him, Gopal? And Gopal said, I'm hitting him because his cows have gone into my land and they're eating the grass on my area of land. And Gopal's and the old neighbor and the wife stared at him and said, Gopal, there's the cows are not there. They're not eating anything. And Gopal said, yes, that's my point. The cows are not here. So why are you both fighting? And that's how we complicate our existence. Very simple, but it happens. And the reason for that is the greatest obstacle to self-satisfaction, which is a prelude to happiness, is uncontrolled desires. When desires, just control us and we don't control them, we're in trouble. But the Gita says that you can't artificially stop desires. They're like water constantly pouring into the ocean. But you can channel them. You can dovetail them. That is very important. This is a very interesting verse from the Gita. While contemplating the objects of the senses, that means when you see something that you are attracted to, you develop attachment for them. From that attachment, you get lust. Lust is not just sexual lust. Lust means the need to possess it because you become attached to it. And when you can't possess it because by nature it's temporary or it belongs to someone else, then you become angry, frustrated. Then you become deluded because you don't see the perspective. Then you lose memory of who you are. You lose a sense of perspective. And when that happens, you lose your intelligence, the ability to discriminate between what is reality and what is speculation. And when that happens, the Gita says, you fall back into this circle of birth and death. Very powerful two verses, but they tell us how very quickly we can go off that road in our quest for happiness. So if we want to simplify our existence, we need to understand and be in touch with what we need. And we should be careful about what we want. A need is something that is necessary. But very often we mix up wants with needs, and the wants are the ones that drive us into anxiety. The Gita gives us a simple rule. That which you need and you acquire, you will be all right. But that which you try to acquire very much and you don't obtain, that's not really something that you need then. It's something that you wanted, but you were not able to obtain it. It's an interesting point to think about. And that's why the Gita tells us that we should appreciate what we have. Sometimes we look at other people's palaces, and we burn the hut that we stay in. There's a saying, by looking at other people's palaces, we burn our huts. We don't appreciate what we have. And when that happens, our hankering will just appreciate. And when that happens, right, it's very difficult. But if you appreciate what you have, then whatever hankerings that you have will depreciate. You all know what's the other meaning to appreciation and depreciation, right? When you appreciate something, it actually increases in value in your estimate. But when you do not appreciate something, its value actually depreciates. And that is so true in life too. That is why the Gita tells us the one single quality towards the road to happiness is to be grateful for what we have. Because gratitude drives away that other gene, which is a big cause for unhappiness, greed. Our real wealth, the Gita says, is not how much you and I have in our CPF and our bank accounts. It's how many lives we have touched and how many people we have inspired to become happy. That's real, deep, lasting, sustainable happiness. And this is very important. The fifth formula for happiness, unity in diversity. This is a picture that shows the ocean on the right side and all the confluence of other rivers coming into the ocean. It's a critical principle to live by. And very often, when we are so diverse, we don't see any unity amongst us. And it becomes such a disturbing element. We can't work together. Why? Because instead of celebrating differences, appreciating differences and how you bring something to the table and I bring something to the table, we want everyone to bring the same thing to the table. And therefore we condemn diversity. So actually the Gita says that we should celebrate diversity and variety. Don't criticize it, because all rivers eventually lead to one ocean. There were 4 blind men and they bumped into an elephant. And each blind man, said, "My dear brother, I'm feeling a snake, and I think that must be what it is. It's long and it's moving around my neck." The second blind man said, "No, it's a sharp sword, it's poking my cheeks." Third blind man said, "No, it's a carpet that I feel like a canvas in front of me." And the fourth blind man said, "No, it's a big pillar. I hardly get my hands around it." The story goes in different variations that all 4 blind men bumped into an elephant. One of them just touched the trunk of the elephant, the other one the tusk, another one the foot of the elephant, and the other one felt the vast side of the elephant. Now, the important thing is this. This is another version of it. Each of the blind men felt a touch, and it was based on his experience. So for the blind man that said, "Hey, this is a big snake," in his experience, he's not wrong, because experientially he's right. But to say that that is the only right thing about the elephant is not right. To say that the tree stump is the elephant is not right. To say that the sheath of leather is an elephant is not right. To say, no, the elephant is actually a furry mouse is definitely not right. The point is, we may have so many levels of experience in this world, but a truly wise man, a true devotee of God, a true aspirant of truth in this world will always celebrate diversity, embrace diversity. And so what is our conclusion to what the Gita is saying? The Gita tells us actually that there is a very important but subtle connection between your satisfaction, the level of your peace, and ultimately leading to your happiness. The Gita says that when your happiness is attached to matter, matter itself by nature is temporary. So your misery is temporarily ceased. Like taking paracetamol or Panadol when you have a headache. You all know it's just a painkiller. Your headache's not cured. It'll come back again. But happiness attached to spirit is different. It comes from within. It is not dependent on external conditions. And the 3 qualities that are needed in this pursuit of happiness is actually appreciation, gratitude, and a large dose of humility. The ability to see good, positivity, that's very important. How do we achieve this state of being? The Gita says again the same verse that we started with and how we end today. One who is not connected with the Supreme can neither have transcendental intelligence nor steady mind, without which there is no possibility of peace. So the truth is, connection is very important. Connection with a higher force, connection with a supreme force, connection with what we call the higher reality of life. In the Gita, Krishna declares that to be the most important thing. When we discover that we are not this body and that we are souls, the Gita says when we understand that we are part and parcel of God, that we are part and parcel of Krishna, then that gives us that road to become happy. And this state of being comes through 2 very important pillars. One is association. In the company of drunkard people, even if you drink mineral water, you eventually become drunk because you will taste that wine or that beer, whatever it is. In the company of saintly persons, even if you're not very saintly, eventually you will become saintly. So association is very important. The other pillar is what we call mantra. Chanting the names of the Lord in any form, whether it is from the Quran, the Bible, the Gita, is a powerful medium to connect with our true self. Because the name and God and his form are non-different. And that's why we chant the names. Bhagavatam tells us a very nice point here. If you have suitable shoes on your feet, there is no danger even when you walk on pebbles and thorns. And for such a person, everything is very auspicious. Similarly, if you are self-satisfied, those become your shoes. And no matter how many pebbles and thorns there are on the feet, on the floor, you don't feel the distress. Instead, you walk with comfort because you become self-situated. So this is the essence of happiness. And that is why the sixth factor that we spoke about is actually a combination of all of this. It is about connecting, and that connection is what actually brings us happiness. So I will stop here, and time has run. It's 8 o'clock already. And I want to thank you for being with me today. We could speak for hours on this topic, but I think time is of the essence. Otherwise, you'll become quite unhappy with me. Thank you, Vishal, Prabhu. What happens now? Are there questions? Are there queries?
Thank you so much, Devakinandan Prabhu, for taking out time to share this wonderful concept from the Gita with us. So the Q&A, we will limit to about 5 to 7 minutes. So maybe we can take one or two questions. So what you can do is you can chat in your questions. And then we can...
I'm so happy um, to see human beings. It's so good that and for those of you who put on your videos, I want to thank you. It's nice to know that I'm not speaking to myself. So thank you, Karthik, for coming on too. Very nice to see everyone. Yes. If anyone has a query or something you'd like to share, I'd be happy to hear you. Okay, I think we have
a question.
Okay. What's the difference between appreciation and gratitude? Very nice. One leads to the other. When you appreciate something for what it is, when you try to see something good, then you also become grateful that it is in front of you or it is present in your life. When you are grateful for someone's help, or you're grateful for someone coming and doing something for you, then you also learn to appreciate them. So they're actually very symbiotic, very symbiotic. And yet they are both in one sense different. If you cultivate appreciation, you'll find that gratitude follows. If you're grateful, you find that you are very appreciative. Appreciative means that you try and find good things even when there are things that are not so good. It's a common saying in the Bible that a noble man or a wise or benevolent man is one who can take nectar even from a stalk of poison. And when someone can do that and find appreciation in something, then you find that actually the positive energy can even change that which is not very nice about that person into something more positive. And when gratitude is more for you to grow on, because when you're appreciative of someone, you automatically are able to express gratitude to them. And when we are grateful for the things that happen, it checks our pride. Very important. Otherwise, when we think that we are the ones who are the cause of our success, when we are deflated at some point in our life, or when someone comes who's much better than us, it becomes very hard for us to appreciate that there's somebody out there who's even better than us, even though that is very often the case. I hope that's useful, Arjun.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Arjun. I get to see you too. Okay, now
Could take one more question, okay?
Okay, what's the other question? When feelings such as happiness can so easily be swayed by a situation, should we aim to achieve happiness or strive for meaning and accept that happiness is simply an outcome of the journey? I think you're spot on, because the final point about happiness is to understand the purpose of our life. If we understand the clear goal of life, that we are part and parcel of a larger whole, that we are actually connected to Krishna, as the Gita says, and that we are all individuals, but like children of a parent, we also have that quality which is considered transcendental. When we understand that and we make that the journey, and that becomes the meaning to what we do, when we try to see the hand of Krishna, the hand of God in any situation, when we try to serve all living entities because they are also part and parcel of God, when we have that attitude, then that actually naturally brings us into the possibility of achieving more happiness. I say possibility because the reality of the matter is the quest for happiness is daunting and it cannot happen overnight. But you need to be patient. You need to have faith. And it very often requires a mind shift. I hope that's useful, Amrita.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll now move on to the next part of the program, which is musical mantra meditation, or what we call kirtan. So
While you do that, can I get ready? I'm gonna get off because I need to sit down with my harmonium and move this away. So while Vishal speaks, I'm going to make use of that time so as not to waste your time.
So as we heard from Devakinandan Prabhu, that the two things that really apply as these principles of happiness from the Gita are association and mantra meditation. So one of the ways to do mantra meditation is the musical form of it, which is called kirtan. And the way to do it is very simple. When Devakinandan Prabhu sings, we'll also follow on with him. Because we are not in person together, so we can be on mute, and on our end we can sing, and we just have to put our hearts and try to remember our source, the Lord. That's all we have to do. I think just 10 seconds.
Okay, let's see. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I was seated up. Now I'm seated down. Let's chant. Can you hear me also?
Yes.
Okay. So I think Vishal would have requested all of you to just chant. I will chant first, and then after that you can actually sing. And of course you'll have to mute it, because if you don't, we'll have a symphony of wonderful sounds coming out. Actually, Facebook is much better for this, but never mind, we're on Zoom. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Bol. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Jai Shri Harinam Sankirtan Yajna ki, Hare Krishna Mahamantra Yuga Dharma ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam. So I wish you all the best in your quest for happiness. The Gita tells us that happiness is your right. So please embrace it. And please take these wonderful practical points from the Gita. Think about it, reflect on it, and seek inspiration. Thank you very much, Vishal Prabhu and the organizers. And thank you very much to all of you.